TechMuze, a netcast designed to educate and inspire your musical creativity through tech, both technology and technique. Please visit techmuse.ca for show notes and more. Follow us all over the internet at TechMuze Podcast. And as always, enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 1 of TechMuze. It's really exciting for me to finally actually fire up the microphone and start talking to folks. It's something that I've thought about doing for quite some time, and now it's happening. So welcome. I'm not totally sure how all of you have stumbled upon this little podcast, but if you want, let me know. techmusepodcast@gmail.com. Just drop me a line, and I'm very curious because this is episode 1, so I mean I've got no momentum. Nobody knows what I do and what I'm talking about here, so it's going to take a little while for people to catch on, and hopefully people like it. We'll see as time goes on. So anyway, I guess I should start by introducing myself and kind of letting you all know where I come from and what I'm trying to accomplish with this little podcast. My name's Des Asante, and I'm a musician, mix engineer, computer geek, guitar builder. You know, I do a lot of things, mostly pertaining to music, and I would say mostly pertaining to music and tech, which is kind of where the whole title and concept of the podcast comes from. I've been a self-proclaimed computer geek all my life since I could tie my shoes. I remember looking at the old Radio Shack magazines back in public school, drooling over the new Tandy 1000, Them's were the days. But anyhow, and then of course, I discovered music when I was around, I'd say 6 or so. A lot of my cousins played instruments and so forth, and that fascinated me. And I started getting into that and playing the piano. And one thing leads to the next, and it's kind of nice because I'm at a point in my life where I've been able to sort of fuse all of the things that I'm passionate about into something that I can do fairly often, and that's really what it boils down to. If there's something that you really enjoy doing, how do you figure out a way to do it often, and still get life taken care of? So anyway, I don't make $1 million, but I really enjoy what I do for the most part. And now this podcast is a part of that, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how this pans out. But anyway, what I hope to do with this show is provide some degree of kind of entertainment and education rolled into one. A little bit of information, in terms of news and things, but I don't want this really to be a news show. I'll blab on a little bit about what's going on, but I'm more interested in, sort of starting a dialogue, getting a bit of a conversation going on, getting questions asked and answered, and doling out, perhaps some technique that you can bring back to your home studio, basement studio, bedroom studio, whatever it is, garage studio, whatever it is that we all have, and make better music, or make more productive use of your time, in a creative capacity. So that's kind of the goal. That's kind of the plan. And we'll see how it goes as time goes on. And basically the way I hope to lay out the show is start off with a little intro, which is like, what you're hearing right now. Get into a little bit of current events. And if anything interesting has cropped up in the last little while, then give it a mention, maybe start a discussion. You can always email into the show, at techmusepodcast@gmail.com if you got comments or criticisms or what have you, questions, answers to questions that listeners have posed. Let me know. And hopefully, like I say, we can get a bit of a dialogue happening. I think that's really important nowadays. You can listen to a radio show or watch a YouTube video or download a podcast or what have you. And that's great, for what it is. But it's always adds a new dimension, a deeper dimension, if you get a little conversation happening, a little community, taking place. And so hopefully over time we can build a little bit of that here. If you do have something to say, drop by techmuse.ca, and you can leave a comment on any of these episodes, or you can drop me a line through the contact page. If you just prefer regular old email, just give me a shout at techmusepodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, we'll spark a dialogue. So I picked up GarageBand for my iPad yesterday, I think it was, and I wanted to check it out. I was happy that it wasn't one of those. I think some people were under the impression that maybe it would only work on the iPad 2, because it's demanding and needs a more powerful processor. But no, it works fine on the iPad 1, which is what I currently own. And I wanted to bring it up because I think it's one of I suppose you could call it a news event. It's fairly current, that I think is perhaps more important than people realize, or at least than I realized when I first heard about it. And I didn't realize until I got to use it, just how simple it makes it for someone to be creative. Whether you've ever played an instrument or not, have any idea how it's done or anything, you can sit down, put this little piece of glass on your lap and poke it a little bit and create music. And you can be creative is what I mean. It's not just like you're pressing play on a loop and it loops and it's like, hey, I'm making music. Well, no, I mean, you can actually be expressive. You can play these instruments and you can put sounds together and you can get fairly complex with it, I suppose. Some of these instruments, like the guitar, when you put it into notes mode instead of chords mode, you can really play it. It takes a little getting used to because you're just tapping on a surface, but you can actually play music and make melodies and so on and so forth with these instruments and be somewhat expressive. They're velocity sensitive too, which kind of boggled my mind. I wasn't sure how they would pull that off, but I guess they use the accelerometer, the iPad and the iPhones. They have this accelerometer in it that sort of allows the device to be aware of when it's moving and when it's not, and which direction it's moving and so forth, right? So I guess the force of your tap jiggles the iPad enough to trigger like a higher velocity, a louder stroke on a drum, for example. And I found that to be really clever. Anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about it is because I find that, like, for example, I sat down last night, with my daughter, who's 5 years old, and we sat with this thing, and she made music all by herself. I kind of coached her on what she might want to push to bring up the instrument she wants, and then she would take it from there. And she made very, very listenable music on this thing. And the other thing I found impressive is that it captivated her attention completely for at least an hour and maybe getting closer to 1.5. And for a 5-year-old, that's impressive stuff. So I guess this part of the show we'll call TechMuze. You can think of it as a tips and tricks section, pointers. Perhaps things I think about that might be helpful that perhaps people haven't considered or haven't noticed. So let's jump right into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about is a little tip that I forget who passed it down to me, but I guarantee you it's not original. And that is when you're in your studio and you're mixing your music, you're putting together the finer details, the position of the elements and how far back or how close to the foreground they are, and what's too bassy and not bassy enough, and what's got too much mids and highs and so on and so forth. Those types of decisions. That you should listen to your music on at least 2 sets of speakers, of monitors. That you should definitely have a second and perhaps opposing, I guess, maybe even opposing reference. So, for example, in my studio, I mix on a pair of Tapco S5s. They're I'd say probably maybe $400 or $500 pair of speakers. Nothing too crazy, but definitely decent for the price.